I'm Francesca Nestor, Assistant Professor in Politics and Government. I am co-director of the COVID-19 course along with Dr. Kira Bailey in Psychology and Neuroscience. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone back for the 13th lecture in our series. Today, we will learn from our panelists, Dr. Kira Bailey and Dr. Vicki DiLillo. Dr. Kira Bailey joined the faculty of Ohio Wesleyan in 2015 after completing a postdoctoral fellowship at University of Missouri-Columbia. She teaches courses in neuroscience for the psychology department and the neuroscience program. Her research examines how individual differences in experience, such as video game exposure and alcohol sensitivity, modifies brain activity related to cognitive control and effective information processing. She has 26 peer-reviewed publications in top-tier journals, including Pediatrics, Psychopharmacology, the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, and Psychophysiology, where her work was the most downloaded article of 2010. This year, she is guest editor for a special issue entitled The Impact of Digital Media Use on Behavior and Brain Function in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Dr. Vicki DiLillo received her PhD in clinical health psychology from the University of Miami and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at The Ohio State University. She has been a member of the Ohio Wesleyan Psychology Department since 2004 and currently serves as department chair. She teaches a variety of courses in the areas of clinical and health psychology. Dr. DiLillo's research focuses on modifiable risk factors on cardiovascular disease like obesity, physical activity, and stress, as well as strategies for enhancing health behaviors among college students. In addition to having over 20 peer-reviewed publications, Dr. DiLillo has served as an investigator on several NIH-funded grants. Dr. DiLillo was the recipient of the 2008 Ohio Wesleyan Sherwood Dodge Shanklin Award for the Encouragement of Teachers, as well as the Libius L. Reed Endowed Professorship in 2013. As a reminder, you can use the chat function to ask questions throughout the presentation. The panelists will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we will open up for questions. And now, social distance, not social isolation, staying connected during COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr. Nestor, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I want to start off by explaining the background that I come from and how my field typically approaches understanding a problem. Cognitive neuroscience is an interdisciplinary area of study that's emerged from many different fields, perhaps most significantly from neuroscience, psychology, and computer science. Our primary goal is to describe how the brain creates and supports mental processes like language, memory, attention, decision-making, and goal-directed behavior. Historically, we've done this by investigating how certain areas of the brain support a given mental function. For example, we might focus on the role of your prefrontal cortex in supporting sustained attention, which is a mental process that you'll need to use a lot over the next hour. Although we often focus on the role of single brain regions, I want to emphasize something that I always tell my students. Being human is a whole brain process. Your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are a joint effort across multiple brain regions. There's an unfortunately common misconception that humans only use 10% of their brain, and that's simply not true. We use 100% of our brain, although areas may be more or less active at any given time depending on what we're currently doing. While we have learned from non-human animal models, cognitive neuroscientists tend to focus on the human brain utilizing techniques like functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and event-related brain potentials, ERPs, as non-invasive ways to observe and measure brain function in living human beings.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you today and wanted to start out by explaining a little bit about the field of health psychology, since it's likely that many of you have never heard of it before. Health psychology is a subfield of psychology that studies how biological factors like a genetic predisposition, psychological factors like coping, and social factors like family or community support interact with one another to influence health and illness. So, for example, a health psychologist might be interested in how exposure to prolonged stress affects the immune system and alters a person's risk for illness. Clinical health psychologists specifically use assessment strategies and research-based interventions like certain kinds of cognitive or behavior therapy to promote health and well-being and to prevent, treat, and manage illness. Clinical health psychologists may work in settings like hospitals with individual clients to help them enhance their mental and physical health. For example, a clinical health psychologist may work with someone who has received a kidney transplant to help them navigate the many lifestyle changes that come with that process. They may also conduct research in academic medical centers, universities, or as part of government agencies like the CDC on issues related to health promotion and the prevention and treatment of illness. Today, Dr. Bailey and I are going to be discussing several different issues. First, we'll be talking about the importance of social connection. We'll also discuss some of the unique challenges we're facing with respect to social connecting during this pandemic. We'll explore how technology, if we use it thoughtfully, can help us overcome some barriers to social connection. And finally, we'll be giving you some research-informed tips for staying connected to one another, even though we may be more physically distant than we would like. Because we'll be talking a lot about social connection today, I wanted to give you a bit of information and explain how psychologists tend to think about this idea. First of all, social connection is a fairly broad construct and refers to the many ways we can connect interpersonally. That might be connecting physically, like when we hug a friend. That might be connecting emotionally, like feeling understood by a family member. That might be connecting behaviorally, like playing a game of soccer in the park. Or it might be connecting cognitively, like solving a challenging problem with a coworker. In short, there are lots and lots of different ways we routinely connect with other people in our lives. When psychologists research social connection, they may operationalize and measure it in a variety of ways. One way they may look at social connection is from a structural perspective. This refers to the number and types of social ties and roles in a person's life. So for example, we're talking about structure if we say that someone is married, belongs to a book club, is a member of a mosque, or considers themselves to be a battling bishop. And for those of you who may not know, members of the Ohio Wesleyan community are known as battling bishops after our unique and very intimidating mascot. Psychologists may also look at connectedness from a functional perspective, in which they examine what specific kinds of support people may get from social relationships. For example, do we have relationships where we can get emotional support, like a shoulder to cry on after a difficult breakup? Do we have relationships where we can get tangible or instrumental support, like a ride to the airport or a friend who can make you a fabric mask? Do we have relationships where we can get informational support we may need, like which courses are required for an Ohio Wesleyan psychology major, or which restaurants are currently delivering? And finally, researchers may be interested in the subjective quality of someone's social connection. In other words, regardless of the number and type of social contexts you have, or what specific types of social support people in your life are able to provide, how satisfied are you with your support and connection? Research has demonstrated that whether we consider structural, functional, or quality-related aspects of our relationships, social connection is critical to our physical health and our psychological well-being. Conversely, loneliness, which can be thought of as perceived social isolation, increases our risk for problems related to both mental and physical health. Some of the most frequently cited work in this area is the research of Julianne Holt-Lunstad from Brigham Young University. A meta-analysis of 148 studies she and her colleagues conducted in 2015 illustrates that social connection provides striking health benefits. Most generally, social connection is associated with reduced premature mortality or risk of early death. Other notable findings from the analyses include the fact that lack of social connection was as risky for health outcomes as smoking 15 cigarettes per day or regularly consuming excessive amounts of alcohol. The study also determined that social isolation is twice as harmful to health as obesity. Other research conducted over about the last 20 years has shown that loneliness is a risk factor for high blood pressure, poor sleep, decreased immune functioning, and metabolic syndrome. Social connection is related to mental and cognitive health as well. For example, studies conducted by the late John Cacioppo and his team demonstrate that loneliness is predictive of depression symptoms over time. Other studies focusing on populations of older adults show that social isolation increases the risk for developing cognitive decline and even dementia.
Social connectedness is associated with biological and behavioral changes that have positive impacts on our health. In 2018, Bertuccino and colleagues reviewed the evidence for a larger model linking social support to physical health. They discussed several physiological pathways through which social support has positive effects. Social support may buffer the potentially harmful influences of stress-induced cardiovascular reactivity. It's also associated with lower resting blood pressure and with lower cortisol levels, lower catecholamine levels, and higher oxytocin levels. So to elaborate on a few of these, cortisol has known immunosuppressant effects, which is why prolonged stress can lead to illness. Greater social support may help the immune system in times of stress by lowering cortisol levels. Oxytocin, sometimes adorably referred to as the cuddle hormone, has known anti-stress effects in the brain and our peripheral nervous system. Social support increases oxytocin levels, providing another pathway for offsetting the negative biological effects of stress. There are a few studies linking social support to anti-inflammatory responses, which could be a protective factor in any number of diseases. More research is still needed to understand all of these different pathways, but early signs point to multiple biological relationships that could account for the positive effects of social support on our health. In addition to the biological, social connection may increase engagement in healthy behaviors, providing further benefits to our overall health. For example, individuals with diabetes and arthritis are more likely to adhere to treatment regimens when they have social support. Social support is also associated with greater physical activity, reductions in smoking and alcohol consumption, and better sleep quality, all things that have positive benefits on our health. COVID has disrupted our social connectedness in a few significant ways. The most obvious is that it's limiting our opportunities for in-person interaction. In February of this year, before the pandemic really began shutting down the US, Alicia Lieberman and Juliana Schroeder published an article that discussed the structural differences between in-person and online interactions. Notably, online communication provides less opportunity to read social cues because so much of it is either text-based or poor quality videos. It isn't just what people say that allows us to connect with them, but how they say it. We rely on a plethora of nonverbal information to understand others when we're in person, and these additional pieces of information can be lost when we aren't face-to-face. Text-based communication is also more prone to misunderstanding, and poor quality videos make it difficult to read nonverbal cues. Another important aspect of in-person interaction that's been dramatically reduced by COVID is touch. Whether it's a handshake with a new acquaintance or a hug with a loved one, touch increases our social bond. In April, Dr. Laura Neminma and her colleagues published an incredible paper describing a dual fMRI scan of two people while they interacted with one another. This is actually a really big deal in my field because it's been challenging to study the neuroscience of social behavior since we can typically only measure the brain activity of one person at a time. The participants in this study were both in scanners, and they were able to take turns tapping each other on the lip. The data revealed that when participants touched each other, their brain activity synchronized. And this paired activity may actually form some of the neural basis for social connection. COVID has also changed the types of interactions that we're able to have. We've successfully moved many of our activities online, like work, school, meetings, and even some social events. What we likely aren't recreating effectively online are the more organic types of social connections. The unplanned moments when you run into someone you know and have an impromptu social exchange. Coworkers aren't chatting about the weekend around the water cooler. Neighbors aren't stopping to shoot the breeze while out for a walk. And you're far less likely to randomly run into someone you know at the grocery store and take a few minutes to catch up. Each of these moments may seem insignificant, but they all add up and meaningfully contribute to our sense of connectedness. Finally, there's been a lot of turmoil and trauma in the past few months. We've all experienced challenges. As they say, we're in this together. But as this course has discussed in previous weeks, we do not all experience the same challenges, nor do we experience them in the same way. The continued fight for racial justice and the COVID-19 pandemic have hit some of us harder than others. Stress and anxiety increase our need for social connection, but they may also decrease our ability to connect with others authentically. It can be more difficult to ask for social support or to provide social support to others when we're feeling overwhelmed. It's important to acknowledge this and think about how we can care for one another and truly be in this together. So science tells us that social connectedness is critical to our health and well-being. And we can obviously see many ways that COVID has created obstacles to having authentic social connection. So what can we do about this? Are there ways that we can maintain or even enhance our social connectedness during this time? Dr. DiLillo and I would like to offer you some concrete pieces of advice. We've based this advice on research whenever we can, but there is an important caveat. The COVID pandemic is unprecedented in many ways. There's almost no research directly studying how the pandemic impacts social connectedness or how to correct for it, because research takes time and we are literally living in this right now. There are also very few similar situations that have been studied in the past. The fact that is that there are a lot of unanswered questions about COVID and social connectedness. What we hope to do is give you some best practices based on reasonable extrapolations from the research that we do have on social connection and in particular technology use. So tip number 1. Recognize the difference between social interaction and social connection, and specifically target connection. Reacting to a lot of posts on social media is interacting with the content that other humans have created, but it's not connecting with humans. Try engaging in a conversation rather than just clicking like. As I mentioned before, text-based conversations are ripe for misunderstandings. So you need to be willing to engage and to ask and answer questions so that you can come to shared meaning together. Likewise, having a lot of Zoom meetings is social interaction, but it won't necessarily make you feel more connected. You may have heard of or even experienced Zoom fatigue, the mental exhaustion that can follow virtual meetings. This occurs in part because we have to work so much harder to read social cues in that format. But neuroscience provides some helpful insight here. Wim Powell and colleagues have shown that humans can actually hear body language. The study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences this year used recordings of 3 men and 3 women making monotone sounds like ah, while using a number of different hand and arm gestures. Participants listened to these recordings and they were able to accurately guess what movements were being made, and in some cases, they could even mimic the person's movement. So if choppy videos and awkward pauses in virtual calls are rattling your nerves, try making an old-fashioned phone call. You may find it easier to connect to another person by listening to them talk without the unhelpful visual information in a video.
Tip number 2, This tip is closely related to the tip that Dr. Bailey just provided. Given that most of us have really increased our use of technology over the past few months, it's even more important than ever before to critically examine how we are using technology. As Dr. Bailey suggested, just because you're online, it doesn't mean that you're connecting with others in a helpful or healthy way. We can all probably recognize, for example, there is a qualitative difference between checking on a friend who's been having a hard time versus mindlessly scrolling through Twitter. Research suggests that we can use technology in a way that is helpful or harmful to our well-being. For example, in 2018, Melissa Hunt and her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania published a really interesting study showing that undergraduates who were randomized to reduce their use of social media to about 30 minutes a day showed significant decreases in both loneliness and depression compared to a group who used social media as usual. And this happened over a period of just 3 weeks. In contrast, a study conducted by William Chopik showed that among older adults, higher use of technology for social connection, things like using email, video chatting, online chatting, and use of a smartphone, predicted better physical and mental health. Furthermore, the study suggests that this relationship occurs because technology use reduces loneliness, which in turn promotes health and well-being. Based on the research in this area, my tip for you would be, first, to examine how you are using technology. Is it to connect? Is it to distract yourself? Is it for entertainment? Is it out of sheer habit? And more importantly, pay attention to how your technology use is making you feel. If you notice that scrolling through Instagram is making you feel sad or lonely, or if Twitter scrolling is making you anxious, it could be helpful to impose some limitations for yourself and instead spend that time on other activities that can help you feel more positive and socially connected. Now, one caveat I'd like to make here concerns news-related media, most of which seems to evoke feelings of stress, anxiety, anger, or despair these days. I'm not suggesting you avoid all news. I am suggesting, though, that overconsumption of news-related media can be counterproductive to both mental well-being and social connection. If you find yourself endlessly scrolling through news stories online or arguing with people on social media endlessly about current events, it might make sense to intentionally check the news only once or twice a day for 10 or 15 minutes at a time.
Tip number 3 doesn't directly involve social connection, but in the interest of building good habits, I would suggest setting a curfew for your technology use. Unplug from electronic devices at least 30 minutes before you plan to go to sleep. There have been many studies by the National Sleep Foundation and sleep researchers that consistently find that the use of electronic devices delays sleep and disrupts our normal sleep cycles. The physiological basis for this is largely that short wavelength artificial blue light from these devices suppresses melatonin release that's needed for sleep. And many of you have probably heard of this by now and know that devices often come with options for turning off or dimming the blue light. And that's definitely helpful, but realistically, you should still be giving your brain some transition time between ravenously consuming the news and social media and trying to fall asleep. Oh, and sleep is definitely connected to your ability to regulate your emotions, particularly negative emotions. And that does impact your relationship with others. So in a roundabout way, setting a technology curfew can also increase your social connectedness.
Tip number 4. As Dr. Bailey mentioned earlier, one of the ways in which social connection has changed during COVID is that we have many fewer opportunities for casual, spontaneous interactions that arise organically. While it may be challenging, we can make attempts to recapture some of these less formal social opportunities virtually. In a work setting, it might be helpful to intentionally build in a few minutes of unstructured time at the beginning or end of a meeting for colleagues to chat casually and check in with one another. Another option might be to create a virtual forum where colleagues can log in and talk about things not specifically related to work, kind of like a virtual water cooler. Some educators have successfully used a variation of this practice by creating virtual space or discussion boards for students to interact with one another about topics that are unrelated to class. In our personal lives, it could be beneficial to look for opportunities to replicate some of the more normal interactions that allow us to connect socially. In addition to popular virtual happy hours, we could, for example, invite a friend or family member to have a virtual meal with us. Just literally set up a device on the kitchen table and share a meal simultaneously. Another idea might be to virtually watch a Netflix show or movie with a friend who is not there physically with you. This may seem a little weird at first, but it's one way to recapture some of the things we might normally do to connect with a friend on a daily basis. We can also help our younger children connect with their social networks virtually. For example, caregivers from different families may take turns reading stories to kids through Zoom or Google Hangout. I heard of another really creative idea from a friend who has a school-age daughter. She set up a virtual sleepover with her daughter and her daughter's best friend that included a shared movie, simultaneous popcorn snacking, and settling into sleeping bags for the night in their respective living rooms, all over Zoom. The specific activities we may choose to share with family and friends virtually will certainly be very individualized. The main goal, though, is to intentionally create some of those normal, less formal social interactions we may be really missing right now.
Tip number 5. Here's something that you may not know about brains. They are all about patterns. Predictable patterns help the brain conserve effort for more difficult tasks like outrunning a bear or filing your own taxes. This explains why a lot of our behavior consists of habits. You have habits for connecting with your colleagues at work. You have habits for connecting with your friends out on the town. You have habits for connecting with your spouse or kids at home. You have habits for how to connect with different people in different social contexts, and the context is often a key indicator for which behaviors are appropriate. But now, all of that's pretty much thrown out the window because you're trying to connect with almost everyone you know through a computer screen, by yourself on the couch, possibly while not wearing any pants. This can make us feel off balance, like we aren't sure how to behave and that work and play can't be effectively separated. Fortunately, brains are also highly adaptable. Your old habits for parsing behavior by social context or environments may not work right now, but you can create new ones by creating separate spaces in your house for different kinds of social situations. And I do mean this literally. If you have a home office, try only doing work from there and then moving to your kitchen or living room when you're meeting with friends or family online. Pick a different room for connecting with different people. You could even use a different device or piece of technology to create a different social context. These very small changes help us create new patterns and new habits for having authentic social connections online.
So far, the tips that Dr. Bailey and I have given you focus on issues related to technology. However, we thought it was worth highlighting a few other more general ideas that can be helpful for promoting and enhancing social connection. Which brings me to tip number 6, the practice of expressing gratitude. This is a practice borrowed from the field of positive psychology, which focuses on strengths and behaviors that help people live a life full of meaning and purpose. Research demonstrates that experiencing gratitude or a feeling of thankfulness and appreciation predicts both physical and mental well-being. Furthermore, the research points to some specific things we can do to intentionally cultivate gratitude and that can have significant benefits. For example, Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough have demonstrated that asking undergraduates to write down 5 things they are grateful for, either weekly or daily, depending on the study, resulted in a range of benefits, including more optimism about the coming week, more regular exercise, fewer physical symptoms, and feeling better about life as a whole, compared to undergraduates who wrote about annoyances or neutral events. While making a habit of writing down things you're grateful for could benefit you personally, when we're considering connectedness, another type of gratitude practice may be even more relevant. This practice is called the gratitude visit and was described by Martin Seligman and his colleagues in a 2005 paper. Participants were instructed to identify someone who had been particularly kind to them, but who had never been properly thanked. They were given a week to write and deliver in person a letter of gratitude to that individual. Compared with 4 other interventions designed to increase happiness and well-being, the gratitude visit had the most powerful and longest lasting positive benefits. During this time of social distancing, we may not be able to carry out an in-person gratitude visit, but there are still things we can do to express our genuine appreciation for other people in our lives. So, for example, we could write a letter and send it old school by snail mail. We could send an appreciative email. We might express genuine in-person appreciation to someone in our immediate household, even if they've gotten on our last nerve during quarantine. We could have a virtual gratitude visit through Zoom or FaceTime. We might organize or participate in an activity to thank healthcare or other essential workers. And finally, we could use chalk to leave a brief thank you outside someone's house or place of business. The science of gratitude suggests that these practices can have benefits for you as well as the person you're thanking, and it's very reasonable to expect that you'll be enhancing social connection as well.
Tip number 7, engage in pro-social behavior. Helping others contributes to our own well-being as well as the well-being of the person we're helping. The latter is probably obvious, but research provides examples of the former as well. A recent study by Laura Agnon found that students who spent money on a stranger in need reported higher momentary happiness compared to those who spent money on themselves. In another study, reward centers in the brain were more active when participants spent $10 on a charity compared to spending $10 on themselves. And in yet another study, those same reward centers in the brain were more active when participants comforted a loved one. This activation was greater while providing comfort to the loved one, regardless of whether or not the loved one was distressed. But reward areas of the brain were most active when the loved one was actually in distress. Being there for someone who needs us literally causes us to experience pleasure. How can we help others right now? Here are just a few ideas, some of which echo Dr. DiLillo's advice for showing gratitude. You can donate money to a charity or a cause that you believe in. You could send food to healthcare providers. You could deliver groceries to someone who can't get them on their own. You could volunteer at food pantries, and for this one, I'll just note that you should make sure that it's safe and you follow all of their guidelines. You could make or donate masks. You could write encouraging messages in chalk on the sidewalk. Likewise, you could place a teddy bear in the window with a hopeful message. You could also donate blood, and you could join the protest for racial justice. No matter your circumstances or your resources, there's always something that you could do to make another person's day a little brighter or their load a little lighter. And by doing so, you help yourself as well.
And finally, tip number 8. We've talked about some strategies for enhancing connection with and support from family and friends, but you may find yourself in need of additional support from a mental health professional during this stressful time. Many, if not most, mental health professionals have adapted their services to be provided online via secure platforms that allow for video chat. Many providers and treatment centers also offer online group sessions for clients who may benefit from that service as well. Another thing worth knowing is that most insurance companies will cover online mental health services in the same way they cover face-to-face sessions. While it may seem a little strange or awkward to participate in online counseling, we have good reason to believe that online mental health services can be as effective as face-to-face therapy. High-quality randomized studies conducted over the last 10 years or so have demonstrated that telehealth interventions are generally as effective as face-to-face counseling sessions for a range of problems, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and bulimia. So if you or a loved one is struggling and suspect you could benefit from professional help, there's no need to wait till you can safely resume face-to-face meetings. It's definitely worth considering getting additional support and social connection from a mental health professional online. So to conclude, Dr. Bailey and I have given you a number of tips today that are based and grounded in the research, and we hope you'll find at least one or two of them helpful for your specific circumstances. We've summarized our tips, and you can find them shortly on the live guide for this week. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your taking the time out to be with us. We've enjoyed being here, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both so much. That was tremendous. I really like how you provided us with concrete things that we can do that were so couched in research. So we've had excellent questions from your participants, as well as ideas that they've shared with one another on how to remain connected. I wanted to start with a question. If people want to learn more, let's say OWU students, what classes should they take? And then others who are watching who maybe aren't OWU students, what can they do to learn more about these subjects?
I will start, and I will say that for OWU students, if you're interested in learning more about the brain side of this stuff, then I mean, we offer several neuroscience courses. The one that I think most directly links to the material from this week is called Affective Neuroscience. And it basically goes into the science behind emotion and just affective information processing. So how do we understand social cues? How do we process and use that information? So that would be directly related to what we've talked about today.
And I would also add to that, within the more general psychology curriculum, I'd suggest two courses in particular. One would be the course in health psychology that really focuses on the interconnection of biological, psychological, and social factors and how they influence health and illness. We spent a good bit of time in that class talking about social support and how social support can be really, really useful, particularly in reducing stress. Another good course to take that talks about all kinds of social relationships, not just interpersonal social connectedness, would be a course called social psychology. And if you are an OWU student, either health psychology or social psychology would be a class that would be really appropriate to take right after introductory psychology.
Thank you. Oh, Dr. Bailey, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, I was trying to think of resources outside of the classroom. And I follow a page called Neuroscience News, and that's actually that's where I found the study on touch originally. Like, obviously I spend a lot of time reading empirical articles about neuroscience, but like if you're just wanting to get kind of the lowdown on you know, what's going on in the research right now, then that's a good resource, Neuroscience News.
Great, thank you. If someone feels like they need to talk to a counselor, but they're not sure where to start, what would you recommend as a first step to get connected with someone?
I'm happy to take that one. That is a great question. Um, there are really a few different places you can start. One strategy would be to talk to your healthcare provider. Many healthcare providers are well connected with mental health providers in their own communities and could provide you with a list of folks to talk to. So that would be one really applicable local resource. But if for whatever reason that strategy doesn't work well for you, another option would be to use the resources on the American Psychological Association website. They actually have a therapist locator that you can use to put in your location and any other sort of desires you may have about a therapist, whether there is a particular gender you would like or a particular city you need them to be in, particular insurance company that would be beneficial. You can get all that information from the locator on APA. And one thing that's really helpful about that site right now is that it also tells you if they are accepting new clients virtually. That is a new little feature that they've added to that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. A lot of us during this time of working from home, for many of us, have had to deal with the comparatively minor challenge of handling our pets while we're doing all that. And I was wondering, and an audience member also asked, how does having an animal companion during this time compare to having social support networks with humans?
That is an interesting question. Um, I don't know that that there's research that compares in a situation like this support from animals versus support from human networks. But there is a lot of experimental research in the lab showing that a friendly animal, like a golden retriever, is very helpful in reducing subjective distress and in reducing physiological measures like blood pressure and heart rate reactivity during stress. So a lot of experimental laboratory studies point to the idea that we do get a sense of at least emotional support from animals. It's a lot harder to do real life experimental studies with pets because it would be logistically challenging to try to randomize people to have a pet or not. But in short-term laboratory studies, absolutely.
I'll just add, this is not my area of research whatsoever, but one of the things in affective neuroscience that we talk a lot about is the differences and similarities between human and animal emotion. And because we've talked about that, I have recently realized that there is like a whole field of research on dog cognition. And so if you're interested in, and a lot of those studies really do look at like literally how do dogs think and how does their thinking mesh with the owner or their caretaker, right? And so there's like there's one really cool one I'm thinking of where it kind of showed maybe that dogs actually sometimes trick their owners to get more treats. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, then I would suggest looking up research on dog cognition because it's, you know, again, it's not necessarily directly applicable to dog versus human companionship, but it does give some really interesting insights into the relationships that we have with dogs.
As an animal lover, I find all of that very fascinating. We have some folks who are concerned about the role of connection and recovery from COVID, since a lot of people have not been able to have people visiting them in the hospital, for example. So I wondered if you two would be able to speak to the importance of connection in that kind of a context.
I think that's a really, really valid concern. Again, while Dr. Bailey, highlighted that we don't have research about that specific topic yet because we are living in the middle of it. I suspect that social connection would be as important, if not more important, for people who are hospitalized and recovering. The closest area of research that I can really think about right now relates to individuals who may be in nursing homes for whatever reason. And one of the things we do see is that when folks are in nursing homes and have less social connection, there are typically some not so great consequences. I mentioned before that lack of social connection can be related to the development of cognitive decline. Loneliness is a real concern. And I imagine that loneliness is going to be something we do see in folks who are hospitalized for long periods of time. I suspect that that's something that on top of physical concerns, we see, of course, that healthcare providers are going to really be making note of.
I'll add that there's definitely some work with neurodegenerative illnesses like Alzheimer's that show that social support provides some protective factor against like how quickly the disease progresses. There have even been some really interesting studies that have found people who have some of the neural hallmarks of Alzheimer's, the plaques and tangles, but have not developed symptoms. And one of the differences, of course, a lot of it is also genetic and biological and all of these other factors, but one of the factors is the size of that person's social support network. So the bigger the network, the more protected you seem to be from the declines that happen in Alzheimer's. So again, that's not directly related to COVID, but I mean, I think that from what we're seeing with a lot of other illnesses, it is very much the case that having social support is a protective factor. So I think that's important to consider right now and how people are recovering from COVID. I'm not quite sure what we can do about the fact that people have to be separated from their loved ones while they are potentially, able to spread COVID. I will say that I have seen, and this is just anecdotal, but I've seen so many stories online about nurses and doctors just going above and beyond to provide social support to these patients. They'll deliver letters back and forth with the family, get them on the phone or, on like a Google Meet or Zoom. I guess I would say that that's another way that our healthcare providers have really been supporting us during this time. They're not just taking care of our physical well-being, they're also trying to take care of us mentally and provide social support when we can't get it from our loved ones.
Yet another reason to express gratitude to our healthcare providers.
Absolutely. And one participant has asked, well, what about the psychological effects of having been treated? So I've read that when you're on a ventilator, for example, sometimes people have post-traumatic stress disorder following that experience because it's so intense. And then with what you all were saying, it also made me wonder about the mental health impacts essential workers, especially nurses, might be having following a situation like this, especially in places like New York, where there were so many cases.
I do think that the mental health of our healthcare providers is really important to be paying attention to right now. They are heroic. They are on the front lines. They are working like crazy. And above and beyond just the absolute mental and physical stress that they're dealing with, there are also all kinds of stressors that they've probably never had to encounter before. Those healthcare providers who have other people who live with them are dealing with concerns about bringing the virus home to their loved ones. They may be dealing with seeing much more death and disability than they do on a day-to-day basis. I think your concern about having longer term consequences from their work is really well founded. Fortunately, psychologists are at the ready to help healthcare providers, and people who are trained in clinical health psychology in particular, like I am, are very attuned to those sorts of issues, and how to help healthcare providers through this process. I think one of the challenges is that sometimes our folks who are out there on the front lines, who are so used to taking care of other people, may be more hesitant to recognize or accept that they need help themselves. So if any of you in this large class are relatives or loved ones of healthcare providers, don't be shy about providing a little socially supportive nudge to them if you think they might benefit from some professional support.
Okay. I'm wondering, could you speak a little bit too about how different age groups are affected by isolation during this time? Obviously, having my work with college students, I think about college students a lot, but because of family members, I also think about how it has important and I think unique impacts on like the elderly population. So I wondered if you had some insights on that.
I can speak a little bit to younger kids. So I'm thinking, like toddlers and then K through 12. A lot of social development is happening through those years. And so I think that the negative impact for those younger ages is that they're not able to be around their peers as much. And there's a lot about social interaction that you can't learn just from an adult. Like you need to be interacting with other people your age to work through some of those social behaviors. So I'm thinking of a specific example when I was having a conversation the other day with Dr. Pamela Piza, who is in our math department and also in the neuroscience program. And she was talking about the struggle in trying to figure out when to send her toddler back to daycare, because technically they don't need to. And obviously there are health concerns if you send them back. But the thing she's really worried with is how it is what he's missing by not interacting with other kids. So, there are things like he's at that age where sharing is like a thing for him, like he doesn't want to share really. And so it's been hard. They don't know how to recreate this thing where like, okay, sometimes somebody's just going to take something away from you and you're just going to have to deal with it. It's like that interaction that he has with his parents versus having that same interaction with another child where they have to be just kind of like left with how that feels and like work through it and learn emotion regulation. That's just so hard to replicate if you're just the only kid in the house with a bunch of adults. So, I would say that is definitely a concern, I think, for parents of these younger kids, that they're not getting the same amount of social interaction that they really need to learn how to be socially responsible people.
And at the other end of the age spectrum, I would say that older adults are at particular risk for experiencing the negative effects of loneliness during this time. We know that older adults are a group as a whole that tend to struggle with perceived social isolation more than other age groups. And certainly having restrictions on, on physical movement and being able to interact with family members and friends is likely to exacerbate that. You add to that fact that even when some folks feel comfortable being a little more out and about in the world, older adults are at higher risk and so have more reason potentially to stay socially isolated longer. And that can be a real challenge. I think those of us who have older adults in our lives may really be advised to do what we can creatively to continue to connect with those folks if we cannot see them face to face.
Yes, very important considerations. So you all mentioned the struggles of understanding communication that is only text-based. And we have a student wondering, do emoji help with connectedness and understanding of text-based conversations?
That's a great question. Yeah, so there have been a few studies on this, and I think that the major takeaway is often just that text-based communication is not as good as face-to-face conversation. So that's often like the main takeaway from these studies. But they do tend to also find that if you're going to use text-based conversation, things like emojis can be helpful, because the reason why text-based is so prone to misunderstanding is that you can't hear the person's tone, right? So like sarcasm, whether or not you're joking or you're saying something in all seriousness, like all of that is so tone-based. And what we tend to do when we can't hear tone is that we read the tone that we think the person is using. And that can be very dangerous, because they may have been using a totally different tone than the one that we're reading in our head. So I think the problem is the missing tone. So what emojis can do is put a little bit of tone back in, right? So like if you really are saying it to be, happy and supportive, then you can use an emoji to show that. If there are, emojis that indicate a little more sarcasm or anger, so it does help put some of the tone back in. Unfortunately, at this point, most of the research just suggests that text-based is not as good. I think it's something that, and this is not research-based, this is just me spitballing this, I think it's something that humans may have to be prepared to adapt to more, because we are using so much more text-based information. So like I've heard people on Reddit talk about, I wish there was a font for sarcasm. So like, I don't know, maybe there will be some more creative ways, not just emojis, but other creative ways that we can use text to get our tone across, even if, it doesn't do it naturally.
And I'll just add something that is slightly tangential but relevant based on the gratitude tip that we gave you all. There was a study that was recently published. I'm not sure what year it was, but it was in the last couple of years, that asked undergraduates to do sort of a modified gratitude visit where they expressed gratitude to someone via text. And that particular intervention did have a beneficial effect. So if you're looking at what to text, you can start with a gratitude text, perhaps. You might not even need an emoji for that one.
Interestingly enough, a couple of participants are pointing out that when we're talking about older adults and how they're affected during these times, and then in this context as well, it's even worse because they may not be familiar with emoji or know how to use technology that could keep them connected. Okay, so final question for you all. Let's say that someone hasn't been following your 8 tips that you had, and they're feeling really, really isolated and really lonely and stressed and disconnected from the world. Can you get this back? How quickly can you get back the sense of connectedness if we do start following your tips?
I don't, Dr. DiLillo might have a more concrete idea about this than I do. Like I said before, the brain is so good at being adaptive. It's a double-edged sword though, because your brain will adapt to the bad things you do, and then you'll be better at those bad things, but it will also adapt to the good things that you do. And depending on the behavior, the adaptation can occur fairly quickly. I mean, other behaviors take longer, like you're not going to adapt to learning the guitar in a day. But with social connection, the brain is already kind of pre-wired to be good at social connection. There's actually this whole other line of research that I didn't talk about before that suggests that so we have this default brain network. That's basically what brain areas are most active when you're just kind of sitting there doing nothing. And we call it the default brain mode because it's when you're not doing anything. It turns out that that default brain mode is very similar to the networks that are activated when we are engaged in social interaction. And so what researchers have suggested is that might mean that our default is to think about social connection and social interaction. So I would say that because our brain is pre-wired for social interaction, that is a behavior that you can get back into fairly quickly. So I think if people are feeling really disconnected and they start doing some of these things, assuming that they're reaching out to people who are responsive, because of course, social connection involves more than one person. But yeah, assuming that they're making these connections with people, I think that they can find social support really quickly.
And I would add just one thing to that. I do agree that this is something that could be beneficial quite quickly for folks. The thing that I wanted to add is that when you're thinking about who to reach out to for connection and support, it can be really helpful to think about the people in your social network and take a few minutes to consider what they are good at providing in terms of support. So for example, you may have that person in your life who you know you can count on to get you to the airport on time every time. But that might not be the same person who you're going to go to if you didn't get into grad school and just need to talk for 6 hours. You need to think about the type of support you need. So if you're looking for emotional support, don't go to the person who can take you to the airport and ask for emotional support if that is not in their skill set. Go to that person who you know has a history for you of being there when you need the shoulder to cry on. So that would be just an additional caveat I would give.
Good advice for COVID and non-COVID life, I think. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your time and knowledge with us, and thank you to the audience for joining us and asking excellent questions and sharing ideas with one another. Don't forget that you can continue the conversations on the Facebook group and in the Meet the Prof sessions. It's Thursdays for community members and Blackboard Collaborate, I got that swapped. Thursdays for students and Blackboard Collaborate, and Friday for community members and Blackboard Collaborate. RSVP links will be provided. And if you have any questions, please contact COVID class coordinator at owu.edu. We will see you again on Wednesday at 4 p.m. for Simple Practices for Stress Relief with Dr. Emily Hannafin. Thank you all.